Hello, I'm Professor John Kelly, and this is the Weber Auto YouTube channel. As a result of the worldwide coronavirus pandemic, we have been instructed to teach our college classes, our university classes here, online. And the class that I would normally be teaching at this moment would be automatic transmissions. And that is a difficult topic to teach online. And in this short episode, we are going to look at one of the most basic diagnostic checks for any automatic transmission type of problem, and that is checking the transmission fluid level if your transmission has a dipstick. Now, behind me, I have a 2015 GMC pickup truck, and there is in the GM service information a 2-page document on how to check the transmission fluid level with a dipstick. Now, many of you will probably roll your eyes and think, well, I already know how to use a dipstick. Well, you may not know as much as you think you do. So let's go through this procedure together and find out, what does the cold mark really mean, what does the hot mark really mean, and what is the proper method, according to General Motors, to check the transmission fluid level in the 6-speed 6L90 automatic transmission that's in this pickup truck here. Okay, so let's go through this procedure. It tells us, before performing the fluid check, to perform the following. We're going to start the engine and park the vehicle on a level surface and leave the engine running. Okay, our next step will be to step on the brake pedal and move the gear selector through each gear range, pausing for about 3 seconds in each range, and then moving back to park. So let's go through all the gear ranges. As you can see, we've just moved to reverse, neutral, drive, and back to park. Okay. It tells us to keep the engine running and observe the transmission fluid temperature sensor using the driver information center or using a scan tool. And I've got the scan tool hooked up here, the GM one. And then use the transmission fluid temperature sensor reading to determine and perform the appropriate check procedure. If the temperature is not within range, then you're supposed to let the transmission fluid cool down or heat up, depending on whether or not you're going to do the cold check or the hot check. Well, we are going to do the cold check procedure. So as you can see here, the cold check procedure tells us to use this procedure only as a reference to determine if the transmission has enough fluid to be operated safely until the hot check procedure can be made. The hot check procedure is the most accurate method to check the fluid level. Now, it tells us to use the cold check procedure when the transmission fluid temperature is between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 to 32 degrees Celsius. So we are currently at 81 degrees Fahrenheit. So it tells us to locate the transmission dipstick at the rear of the engine compartment on the passenger side, flip the handle up, and pull out the dipstick and wipe it clean with a paper towel or rag. And then install the dipstick by pushing it all the way back in, waiting 3 seconds, and then pull it out. So here's the lever. I'm going to lift it up, pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, put it back in. Now it tells us to wait 3 seconds and then pull it out again. So now let's look at what the cold fluid level looks like on the dipstick. As you can see, it looks a little bit above the cold line on the front and a little bit higher than that on the back. Now, the procedure tells us to always check the fluid level at least twice. Consistent readings are important for maintaining proper fluid level. If inconsistent readings are noted, inspect the transmission vent assembly and ensure it is clean and unclogged. So I'm wiping that off again. putting it back in. Wait 3 seconds, pull it back out. Now we are at 84 degrees Fahrenheit, as you can see on the scan tool. Let's look at our fluid level on the dipstick again. Looks like it's pretty much in the same location, maybe just a little bit lower than our first reading. Okay, it's telling us to check the color of the dipstick, refer to the fluid condition inspection in this procedure. It tells us if the fluid level is below the cold band, add only enough fluid through the transmission filler tube, the dipstick tube, as necessary to bring it into the cold band. It does not take much fluid, generally less than half of a liter or 1 pint. If the fluid level is in the acceptable range, push the dipstick back in all the way, flip the handle down to lock the dipstick in place, and then perform the hot check at the first opportunity after the transmission reaches a normal operating temperature between 160 degrees Fahrenheit and 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So, what this procedure is telling us is that the cold mark on this dipstick is only there to make sure that the transmission has enough fluid in it to even go perform the hot check later on. If you are relying on the cold level check as your only check, then that's inaccurate. That can be inaccurate, and that's an improper procedure. It's only to inspect the fluid color, condition, and fluid level before you go do some possible damage to the transmission by driving it to warm it up to the hot check procedure temperature of at least 160 degrees. So now we're supposed to go out and drive it, bring it up to 160 to 200 degrees, normal operating temperature for this transmission, and then we'll check the fluid level again. One word on the fluid condition and inspection procedure. As you can see here on the procedure, it tells us to inspect the fluid color. The fluid should be red or dark brown. Transmission fluid has dye in it. That dye does not always stay red. It's perfectly okay for it to start turning a darker color without indicating a problem. It's just a dye. Transmission fluid is still made of a base stock oil and additives. There's different colors of dyes depending on the transmission manufacturer and the transmission. So do not solely rely on the color of the fluid as an indicator of a problem with the transmission. However, if the fluid is very dark or black and has a burnt odor, so those two combined, a burnt odor and a dark fluid, then inspect the fluid and inside the bottom pan for excessive material and other debris. If the fluid is cloudy or milky or appears to be contaminated with water, it indicates that engine coolant or water has contaminated the fluid, and you need to refer to a different procedure for that. So I'm going to put the dipstick back in. We will wait for the transmission to get up to full operating temperature, and the temperature we're talking about is transmission fluid temperature, not engine coolant temperature. You can, as you'll see, the engine will be fully warmed up long before the transmission will be warmed up. Don't think that just because your engine is hot that the transmission is also hot. That is not the case. That's why we have to use the scan tool or the driver information center to verify that the transmission fluid temperature is in the correct range before performing the cold level check or the hot level check. All right, it is 9:17 right now, and we are at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Notice the engine coolant temperature is at 169 degrees Fahrenheit, a slight difference. Engine warms up quickly, transmission warms up slowly. We're at 560 RPM. We need to be between 500 and 800 RPM for this procedure to be accurate. So we will keep monitoring this to see when the transmission fluid temperature gets up to 160 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, just sitting here idling, this can take quite a long time. So I'm going to set a timer here, and we'll just watch and see. Well, we had a slight hiccup. Our shop vehicle here ran out of gas, so we had to put some more fuel in it. So our engine temperature's gone back down a little bit, but our transmission temperature is still on the rise, so we'll keep waiting for it to reach the proper temperature range. All right, we're at 15 and a half minutes at 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The engine is at 205. Just sitting here idling. 19 minutes in, and we're at 108 degrees Fahrenheit. 23 minutes in, we're at 113 on the transmission, 210 on the engine. Okay, we're at 34 minutes. We're at 124 degrees Fahrenheit on the transmission, 212 on the engine. So we've got another 40 degrees to go. 38 minutes, 127 and 212. All right, here we are at 48 minutes, and we're only at 135 degrees on the transmission. Engine coolant has been stabilized around 207 for quite a while. These training vehicles, we are not allowed to go drive them, and so we just let it sit here and idle. In previous experiments over the years, it takes almost an hour to get the transmission all the way up to the proper temperature. So let's keep watching and see. But the engine has been fully warmed up here for I don't know, at least 30 minutes, if not longer, out of the 48 that it's been running. So you cannot rely on engine temperature to indicate transmission temperature. All right, we are 56 minutes into engine idling, and our transmission fluid temperature is still only 142 degrees. Now, just for an experiment, I'm going to check the fluid level on the dipstick just to see where it is in between the cold and the hot marks. We are still waiting for the fluid to reach 160 to 160 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So this will be the fluid level at 144 degrees. As you can see, we are about 3/4 of the way up in between the two holes in the dipstick in the hot cross-hatched area. One important note on this dipstick latch on the top here, this area right here expands. It'll expand out and seal the dipstick tube when you flip that lever down. It expands out. And that is to prevent moisture and dirt and oxygen, air from getting down inside the transmission. We want to prevent that from happening. So when you put the dipstick back in, this needs to be fully seated all the way and then latched. The older dipsticks didn't have this seal, and the dipsticks could be pushed out or blown out of the dipstick tube, or the person doing the transmission fluid level check didn't get it pushed in all the way, and it would allow dirt and moisture and whatever to get into the transmission. So dipsticks, especially if you don't get it seated all the way and sealed, can be detrimental to the life of the transmission if just from contamination getting into it. Not to mention the possibility of putting the wrong fluid in. So we are 1 hour and 2 minutes into the idle, and we are at 147 degrees Fahrenheit, 212 on the engine coolant temperature. We are 1 hour and 21 minutes into idling the engine in order to bring the transmission fluid temperature up to just the bare minimum of 160 degrees. Now, in real life, not in a school setting like this, you would go out and drive the vehicle for 5-10 minutes, and that would bring the temperature up most likely. You would still need to monitor it with a scan tool or through the instrument panel, but the torque converter would create a lot of heat and heat the transmission up more quickly. But in an environment like this, an hour and a half, that's a little longer than I had remembered from a previous experiment where it took about an hour. But here we are just barely at 160 degrees after 1 hour and 21 minutes, and it's time to check the fluid level. No, we're at 158, not quite 160. Okay, we just hit 160 degrees. Let's check the fluid level now. All right, it looks like the transmission fluid level on this first check, it tells us to check it twice and to look at both sides of the dipstick, is just a tiny bit higher than it was at the 144 degree mark. So I will wipe this off and we'll check it one more time. Yeah, the second reading looks the same. Okay, the hot check procedure tells us the same thing as the cold check one did, except to check it at the hot temperature of 160 degrees to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, or 71 through 93 degrees Celsius. Add or drain fluid as necessary to bring the level into the hot band. If the level is low, add only enough to bring it to the hot band. It does not take that much fluid. Do not overfill. Also, if the fluid level is low, to inspect the transmission for leaks. Why is it low? If the fluid level is in the acceptable range, then push the dipstick back in all the way, flip the handle down to lock the dipstick in place, and if the vehicle is equipped, reset the transmission oil life monitor only if the fluid was changed. So we are pretty much unchanged, as you can see here on the dipstick, from about 144 through 160 degrees Fahrenheit. But fluid expands as it gets hot, and normal driving temperature of this truck for the transmission fluid is not 160 degrees. It would be at a minimum for light load driving, but you put much of a load on it at all and it can easily hit the 180 to 200 degree Fahrenheit range. So if you had a dipstick level that showed it to the top of the hot mark, when you're at the minimum temperature of 160 degrees, you can be pretty sure that it's going to go higher than that upper fill mark as the transmission fluid temperature increases towards 180 and 200 degrees. So that would be an overfill condition. A transmission that's overfilled can have fluid get up into the rotating parts inside the transmission, get it all bubbled up and frothed up to where fluid can actually be blown out of the transmission vent. And that can be a dangerous situation depending on where it is in relationship to the hot exhaust pipe that's right next to it. Okay, I just checked the fluid again at 170 degrees, and it's too high. It's above the hot mark. Okay, we have finally hit 180 degrees at 2 hours and 13 minutes. Let's check the fluid level again. So the fluid level at 180 degrees is considerably over the above the hot mark. All right, this will be my last check at 190 degrees. We already know it's over full, but let's see how much it has expanded between the 180 and the 190, if at all. Okay, here is 190 degrees, way over full. And that's the last check I'm going to do. There's no point in going to 200 because it's obviously over full. Okay, so in summary, using a transmission fluid dipstick to check the fluid level isn't quite as cut and dry as many people think it is. If you have a cold mark and a hot mark, there are very specific temperatures at which you must check that fluid at the cold mark and the hot mark, as we've seen. The cold temperature on this particular vehicle was between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's a hot morning and you live in a hot climate somewhere, you may never even get down that low, and so the cold temperature level would be inaccurate at that point. And then we do the hot level check procedure at 160 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's specific temperatures for the specific markings on the dipstick. It's not just a matter of starting the vehicle and putting the dipstick in and then pull it back out and see where it is. It's temperature related. It always has been temperature related ever since the very first General Motors hydromatic transmission for the 1940 model year. It even had a warm-up procedure before you checked the fluid level. Now, one thing I want to show you that I forgot at the start of this video is that if you don't start the engine and you check the fluid level cold, here's what the dipstick looks like. As you can see, the fluid level is extremely high on the dipstick, and the engine must be running on this vehicle in order to pump fluid into the torque converter and the transmission cooler lines and everywhere else, the lubrication circuits and clutch passages and so on that have fluid in them once the engine is started. Now, there are other vehicles where you precondition the vehicle by warming the engine up, but then you shut off the engine before you check the fluid level after that. Hondas and Acuras, for example, many of them are that way. So you don't always have the engine running to do a transmission fluid level check. And so I guess the word to the wise is always go to the service information and look at the correct procedure and follow that to ensure that the fluid level is at the correct point. Some of you may be cussing and wonder why they took the dipstick away on many modern vehicles. And it's because of this complexity and the expense of the transmission. The manufacturer can't have people overfilling or underfilling the transmission, thinking that they're doing it correctly because they don't have the tools or the equipment or haven't read the instructions on how to check the fluid level correctly. So they've gone to sealed transmissions, which actually last longer than ones with dipsticks if you take the customer or the consumer out of the picture. This has been a demonstration on using a dipstick to check the transmission fluid level on a 2015 GMC pickup truck. But there are many other dipstick styles out there. They're not all this style with a cold mark and a hot mark on them. Some of them, the cold mark is above the hot mark and the fluid level goes down as the transmission warms up. Some of them have numbers. It's like a ruler on the end of the dipstick, as you can see here. Some of them have 3 different areas. Some of them have more areas on the transmission dipstick rather than a cold and a hot or a add and a full mark. They have different markings on them to indicate different fluid levels at different temperatures. And you must read the service information on those vehicles to check the transmission fluid level correctly. And of course, add the factory recommended fluid, nothing else. All right, well, thank you for watching. Have a good day.